happened in Gaza. We're told it was a war. But that's not what the combatants remember. One soldier, Israeli soldier, said, "It feels like hunting season has begun." Sometimes it reminded me of PlayStation computer game. Another soldier said, "You felt like a child playing around with a magnifying glass, burning up ants." I remember as a kid, I don't know if nowadays your generations, you have magnifying glasses, but I had one as a kid, and I do remember, and I'm not particularly proud of the memory, but I do remember, I see you do too, concentrating the rays of light from the sun and turning ants into crispy critters. Okay, it was a sadistic act, but I had at least enough presence of mind as a 5-year-old to know that I wasn't engaged in a war with the ants. You feel like a child playing around with a magnifying glass, burning up ants. The metaphor was not very far off the mark. Among other things, Israel dropped white phosphorus in Gaza. I had heard a lot about white phosphorus. Israel has done it many times. I never really researched it much, but this time Human Rights Watch put out a report called Rain of Fire or Rain of Death, I can't recall. In any event, it had fairly vivid descriptions of what white phosphorus is. It reaches a temperature of 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, 816 degrees Celsius. What did Israel do with the white phosphorus? Human Rights Watch said that Israel, and now I'm quoting it, repeatedly exploded white phosphorus munitions in the air over populated areas, killing and injuring civilians, damaging civilian structures, including a school, a market, a humanitarian aid warehouse, and a hospital. It dropped white phosphorus on Al-Quds Hospital. It dropped white phosphorus on Al-Wafa Hospital. Human Rights Watch said, those are war crimes. But we're told it was a war in Gaza, a war between a child with his magnifying glass and the ants. You look at the numbers, the statistics, doesn't seem much like a war. On the Palestinian side, 1,400 people were killed, of whom up to 4/5 were civilians. 350 were children. On the Israeli side, 13 Israelis were killed, of whom 10 were combatants. Of the 10 combatants, about half were killed by other Israelis, what's called friendly fire accidents in war. So roughly one Israeli was killed every 3.5 days in Gaza, which is probably lower than what happens in Watts or most inner city communities in the United States. The ratio was 100-to-1. 100 Palestinians were killed for every Israeli killed. The ratio of civilians killed was about 400-to-1. Doesn't sound like a war. Human rights organizations were criticized because they gave excessive attention, we're told, excessive attention to the crimes committed by Israel as compared to the crimes committed by the Palestinians. The Goldstone report devoted about 10 to 20% of its report to Hamas crimes. Human Rights Watch devoted about 40% to Hamas crimes. But if you look at the actual numbers, a much higher percentage of these reports were devoted to Hamas crimes than the actual percentages show. Deaths, it was about 100 to 1. Take another simple comparison. Homes destroyed. The estimate is about 6,000 Palestinian homes were destroyed during the Israeli attack. On the Israeli side, according to Amnesty International, one Israeli home was nearly destroyed. The ratio, 6,000 to 1. A lot was said about what happened in Gaza. So let's just take 2 or 3 of the typical claims that were made. In the course of what Israel called Operation Cast Lead, they damaged or destroyed 29 ambulances and almost half of Gaza's 122 health facilities, including 15 hospitals. We were told those nasty, demonic, fundamentalist, crazy, lunatic, Muslim, Islam, whatever, that they were using these ambulances to ferry around Hamas militants and Hamas weaponry. Every human rights organization investigated that claim, and every human rights organization came to the same conclusion. Namely, there is no evidence whatsoever that the ambulances in Gaza were being used to ferry around militants or weaponry. In fact, among the witnesses at the Goldstone hearings in Gaza was a representative of Israel's own ambulance service, Magen David Adom. And they said, they told the Goldstone mission, there is no evidence that the ambulances in Gaza were misused. In fact, Israel itself has not presented any evidence. If you look at their main report, they did put out a report to defend their actions. It was quite substantial. It was about 120 or so pages. I was curious what they would have to say about the ambulances. And I turned to that chapter in the report. And the best they can come up with is they cited an article from the Sydney Morning Herald in Australia, which according to the reporter, one ambulance driver stated that Hamas militants attempted to hijack his ambulance, but failed. So even by Israel's own admission, not a single ambulance was misused in Gaza, yet Israel damaged or destroyed 29 ambulances. What about the hospitals? Israel claimed that Hamas militants were seeking or had sought refuge in the hospitals. Again, every human rights organization, I'll get to that in a moment, but there were many human rights investigations, looked into that allegation. Every human rights organization reached the same conclusion. There is no evidence that that Hamas sought refuge in the hospitals.